Welcome to Atlas Live, Atlas Public Policy's live video podcast that brings together industry and policy leaders for lively discussions on the future of clean technology, transportation, the built environment, manufacturing, climate change, and more.
Welcome to Atlas Live. I'm your host, Nick Nigro. This is our first episode, so really appreciate you all joining us. We're here to talk about the state of play of the clean economy in 2026. I have two incredibly smart people who are thought leaders in this space to join me to talk more about what's going on and what we can expect in the clean economy in the United States this year. We have Ben King from Rhodium Group and John Hensley from the American Clean Power Association. Before we get into it, I just wanted to provide a little bit of factoids for you all from Atlas using our Clean Economy Tracker, a free tool that you can access at cleaneconomytracker.org. So last year was actually really strong for the clean power sector, despite what you might have seen in the news. We deployed almost about 50 gigawatts of clean power in the US, led by solar and battery. We also did have a large number of cancellations, totaling about 13.5 gigawatts of cancellations, also led by solar and batteries at about 5 gigawatts each. Notably, about 14% of all the planned offshore wind projects in the US was canceled last year. On the manufacturing side, we still have nearly $300 billion of net investment that's outstanding, but 2025 was about a net decrease in investments due to a large number of cancellations. EVs and batteries were hit the hardest at about $28 billion or so canceled this year, which was more than 12% of the total investment canceled. So all of this adds up to some uncertainty, and that's the future we face right now. Welcome to the show, guys, and let's get right into it. So let's talk about the state of play. So we did have clean power installations at a record high last year, and was that just a big push before the federal tax credits disappeared, or is this something we can expect to continue in 26? And why don't we start with you, Ben, and then we can jump on to John in the screen.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it is notable that we had a record year in 2025, and that was driven in large part by a surge, 35% year on year for storage investments last year. Solar a little bit off their sort of peak in 2024, but on the whole, really a strong showing for clean power installations. And it's notable that that's happening against the backdrop that it was happening in 2025, where we saw increasing demand for electricity, driven in large part by AI data centers and other large sources of load. But not just that, there's structural electrification that's happening. We'll maybe talk about some EVs later on. All these things are coming together. The upshot of that is more than 80% of all new demand for electricity was met by solar and storage last year. That's really cool. There was some other stuff going on under the hood. Gas prices were a little bit on the high side. And so there's always some interesting gas versus coal trade-offs happening on the margins in the power sector. And as a result, power sector emissions are actually up a little bit in 2025 relative to 2024. But still a really strong showing for clean stuff. And I think, it positions us well as we look toward 2026 to think about what might be happening there. Maybe John has some perspectives on that and we can look ahead.
Yeah, for sure. John, let's bring you into the conversation. Tell us what things are looking like for you at American Clean Power Association.
Yeah, I'll agree with a lot of what Ben said. Real strong showing in 2025. One of the technologies that I think is worth highlighting is wind, which actually saw, according to our records, 160% increase over 2024 volume. So we're starting to see a little bit of a rebound in the land-based wind sector as well. And that in combination with solar and storage led to a really strong year in 2025. I do think it's important to sort of disassociate what we saw with 2025 with a lot of the policy actions that we saw in 2025, right? A lot of the projects that came online last year were the result of project development activities that were going on in 22, 23, 24, and very much fall under sort of the old paradigm, IRA, sort of previous administration, et cetera. We are starting to run into a lot of headwinds as we look into 26 and beyond from a lot of the policy and administrative actions that we've seen. And I know we'll get into that into a bit, so I won't dwell too much on it at the moment. But the challenge is we won't see that show up in the numbers until we get to those years, 27, 28, 29. Though there are some indicators that we can get into here that start to show some of that slowdown or some of the challenges that these projects are starting to face into.
So just real quick, quick follow-up on that. John, is what you're saying is 26 is going to look kind of like what it was going to look like regardless of what the feds were going to do because so much was already in the pipeline?
Yeah, I mean, just think about the timeline of these projects. They typically take 4+ years to develop after they've gotten through a lot of their hurdles already, right? So they've already been in the interconnection queue for a while. They've thought about what the procurement strategy is and have started to bring that equipment, looking for PPAs, et cetera. So these are all projects that were penciled and well thought out 3 or 4 years ago. And 26 is going to be the same. These are projects that, started in 22, 23, 24 again. And if you look at a lot of the data out there, 26 is going to be another record year. I mean, EIA data has an estimate around, I think, 78 gigawatts of wind, solar, and storage for the year. So another big boost in the data. Now we'll see, there's lots of project cancellation, delay activity, et cetera, going on. But that is not indicative of what we may see in years 27, 28, and 29, especially as some of these policy headwinds start to come into play.
So Ben, yeah, jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's John, you touched on an important point there, which is to what extent are we going to start to see some of the policy actions actually affecting installations in 2026? We really didn't in 2025, and as both of you have said, it's a strong pipeline for 2026 right now. Hopefully, a lot of those are far enough along the way, but we certainly have seen efforts by the Trump administration to potentially try to tamp down on some of the growth that we've seen in solar and wind in particular. Didn't see a lot of success on that in 2025, apart from some of the characteristic megafauna. We can all think about the offshore wind projects that ran into some real challenges in 2025. We'll be looking carefully to see, are there leading indicators of that those interventions starting to bite a little bit.
So what are some of the things that you're going to be looking for to see, reading through the tea leaves of all that? Tell us.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think it's looking at the pace of project development, right?
Okay.
We can track at various stages of project development.
Mm-hmm.
If we see a pullback as folks are completing construction less quickly, or for some of the smaller projects that are still in the permitting phase, are we actually seeing a pullback starting sometime in 2026? We'll be keeping an eye on that closely, I think.
So you're saying basically deltas or changes in project timelines or other sorts of things, that anything that changes, that's an indicator for you?
Okay. It's a little bit of a data scarce environment right now, so we're doing the best that we can with looking at comparisons of year on year and trying to make determinations based on that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, John, tell us a little bit about what you guys are looking at, and from ACP's perspective on what are some of the indicators that's going to give you a sense of how things are going to look?
Sure. It is a very data scarce environment at the moment. A lot of the developers are holding a lot of the cards close to their chest because it is a very uncertain environment, right? And it's challenging to make decisions, to put money on the table and try to move these projects forward. And so everybody's just a little bit tentative about sharing this information and giving us, some of those leading indicators on this front. However, I think there are a few areas that we can kind of start to peek into to give us some sense of what's happening. One of the spaces that I'll highlight is contracting. So we do a lot of tracking of power purchase agreement announcements, essentially. So these are when a utility or a large buyer of energy, put a press release out there saying, hey, we're going to buy 200 megawatts of solar from this project developer to power our data center or our drilling activity, whatever the case may be. 2024 was a record year for power purchase agreement announcements across the country. 2025 saw a 27% decline. Now, some of that is just a shift in technology choice. We see a number of the large data center players that are starting to look under every nook and cranny for new power. So we've seen revitalized nuclear facilities and other just like creative announcements around the way that they're going to be procuring their power. So some of it is just a technology shift, but we're seeing on the utility side as well And it is difficult to understand if this is just something that is slowing things down, given all the uncertainty. It's a really challenging environment to contract in at the moment, with not only the administrative uncertainty that we see primarily from a permitting standpoint, but tariffs are all over the place. And how do you price that risk into the contracts, and who's going to take those indemnities on to what additional things may come out of the administration as we move forward. So all that uncertainty is making it challenging for those announcements to actually take place. The other area that I'll point to is just, analyzing changes in the nearer term project development pipeline. So we track projects and define them as in the pipeline if they are actively under construction, so there's actual physical activity going on at the site, or they're projects that have met a significant milestone in their development process. So these are projects that have a PPA, they've been announced under like a utility IRP plan, or they've actually put in a sizable equipment order on the facility. So there's real financial risk at stake in these projects. And we've only seen a 1 gigawatt increase in that pipeline.
John, how do you find out about all that?
Yeah, well, one of the nice things about being the trade association for the industry is we have direct access to all of those companies.
Yeah,
sometimes it's a pulling exercise to get it out of them, but the pipeline's slowing down, which is not a great sign, especially amid this load growth.
John, I'm glad you mentioned tariffs, because even in the last week alone, I think uncertainty is certainly the word of the year for 2026. And even in the last week alone, we had developments that pulled, I think, in both directions in terms of uncertainty. The Supreme Court decision on Friday with regard to the tariffs authorized under the Emergency Powers Act, sort of taking a step back, and then the follow-on steps by the White House, still trying to unpack how the heck all of that's going to land, and what that implies for the clean energy side. But John, would be interested in your take on this side of the coin as well. But we also saw guidance from Treasury come out dealing with the foreign aid of concern, the so-called FIAC requirements, and providing what looks like a little bit more of a safer landing space than could have been the case. Maybe constraining a little bit of the uncertainty there. So,
I'd love to hear a little bit more about why you say that, because I think that, when these guidance documents come out, a lot of people are anticipating them. It's a lot of things that are dependent on them. But, why do you say that it's a safer space to land than it could have been?
Well, I think the definitions around what counts in the material assistance cost ratio, the MACR, which is sort of the new thing that we all need to be worried about here. The definitions around what's in and out for that look to be pretty reasonable. Okay. And then there was a provision of safe harbor tables as well for key technologies. It's not going to apply to everybody. Geothermal, for instance, still struggling to figure out how exactly they might be able to comply. But in general, rather than unworkable requirements here, we, in my estimation at least, and again, it would be great to hear from John on this, getting some industry perspective, but it does seem like it landed at a place that's a little bit more favorable.
Yeah. I don't mean to put you on the spot on that one, John, but I'm curious about that too. What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. I think it landed in a much better space than we expected. The ability to rely on the safe harbor tables until final guidance is released is I think a major win for the industry. It's something they basically, you can also qualify for bonus credits under a domestic content provision in the old rules. And they basically took that same criteria and applied it to FIAC. So it's something that the industry has been working with for a couple of years now. We have familiarity and experience around it. So it makes the process a lot easier or familiar to us. The other thing I think is important, like FIAC is really critical for storage. Storage has a much longer timeline for qualifying for tax credits under OBBBA, and having that in place sooner rather than later, so that technology has some certainty and stability in knowing how to adjust supply chain so that it can be in compliance with these rules is critically important, especially for technology that's really taking off at the moment and is helping to solve a lot of these grid resource adequacy and reliability challenges that we're facing into.
So let's do a little bit of a talk about modeling. since we've got one of the best modeling shops out there sitting across the table from me here. So tell us what this means for emissions, not just what we see right now, but what are some things that could really impact what the emissions, trajectory will change, how it might change?
Yeah. So at Rhodium Group, we put out an annual report called Taking Stock. It's our look at where we think the U.S. energy system is evolving and the emissions implications of that. And when we did this sort of post OBBBA, anticipating the regulatory rollbacks that have since come to pass, with recently the proposal to repeal the endangerment planning, but even before that, rolling back the regulations on carbon pollution from power plants and tailpipe standards from EPA as well. We saw a tale of two time periods really. So we saw between now and about 2030, a continued robust environment for clean deployment. And that's because, as you might anticipate, developers, we've been talking about this robust pipeline for a while now. Developers have been working hard to bring things into the pipeline and online in order to qualify for the clean electricity tax credits before they expire. And then the paths diverge. So we, as energy system modelers, the one thing that I know is if I say, here's the exact answer, that's the one thing that it won't be. So we try to approach this with a little bit of humility, right? And say, all right, what are the conditions that would lead to sort of the best case scenario for clean deployment and the worst case scenario for clean deployment? For us, that's on the what we call our low emission scenario, the best case for clean deployment. That's relatively inexpensive, clean stuff, clean wind, solar storage, nuclear, electric vehicle batteries, et cetera, paired with relatively more expensive fossil prices. So a little bit more expensive natural gas, crude oil, et cetera. And then the inverse of that, right? So the high emission scenario is sort of like, what if the atmospherics are particularly bad for clean deployment? When you look at the 2030 to 2040 decade, the outcome of deployment of clean technology on the grid relies heavily on those assumed underlying economics. And so, if you're in a world in which you've got absolute bargain basement natural gas prices paired with capital costs for clean technologies on the grid that just don't move meaningfully from where they are today, that's a rougher outlook. You don't see as much deployment of those technologies in the 2030s as if the economics are more favorable for clean stuff, right? Mm-hmm. This all makes sense, but it's, in most of the scenarios that we look at, there's still robust deployment of clean, which speaks to the economic competitiveness of these technologies, which was not the case that we necessarily were in, a decade ago when we were talking about this stuff. So that's really promising. It's only in sort of the edge cases where, this stuff, doesn't get much cheaper, and gas just continues to, dredge the bottom of the price barrel there. Mm-hmm. that you see continued challenges for clean stuff on the grid.
So, John, I'd love to hear your perspective on that point, particularly around the the cost competitiveness of clean power right now, especially in a regime where, with the exception of batteries, you're not getting tax credits.
Yeah, and I sort of 2 points to pull out of this, right? I think we need to think about timeline specifically here, right? Because we've got a near-term demand need between now and 2030, and then load growth is going to continue growing from 2030 to 2035 and beyond, right? If you look at that near-term period, you don't have a whole lot of options for the technology that you can bring online, right? There's only so many projects that are in the queues. They're predominantly clean. There's a lot of talk about, how do we bring more gas into that equation? How do we start back on the pathway towards nuclear? What aid can delaying coal retirements bring to the equation? But the option set is really constrained, and any new gas facility, which I think gas has become sort of the technology that a lot of folks are talking about as they think about how do we fill this energy need over the next 5 years. There just simply aren't that many turbines available in that timeline. The ones that are available have already been spoken for and are sort of in everybody's projections going forward. And so, the challenge in the near term is if you start taking wind, solar, and storage off the table, you start to run into real, shortage of both energy and capacity challenges. We're talking about either grids not having the resources to keep the lights on, or sacrificing economic growth, or telling data centers to, turn tail and go to a different market because there's not enough power for them here. And then there's sort of the 2030 to 2035 time period where I think that cost competitiveness angle comes into play, right? Then you sort of have all the technologies that are at the table and ready and able to compete. And, at least what we're seeing in the data now is that clean energy continues, whether it's with a tax credit or without a tax credit, to be the most economic resource available. Let's just talk about gas for a minute. 2 to 3 years ago, you could contract for a new gas facility at, say, $1,000 a kilowatt. Today, that cost is 2.5 to 3x. So you're talking $2,500 to $3,000 a kilowatt. If you can even get the turbine, there's only so many reservation slots available. They're sort of few and far between. And even if you're talking a $3 per MMBTU gas cost, that's $100 a megawatt hour electricity, and wind and solar are, well below $80 a megawatt hour, even on an unsubsidized basis in most of these markets. So the clean technologies continue to be the most cost effective. And we see that even when you want to get into kind of the intermittency conversation as well, and think about what does it cost to firm up wind and solar? So what does it cost to attach a battery or rely on the system to sort of firm up that wind and solar generation with like a CT unit or something else? Even when you factor in that firming up cost, clean energy still looks the most cost effective in basically all of these markets, barring some big substantial shift in the way turbines are currently being priced or where gas prices are headed.
John, I'm glad you brought up the sort of energy cost implications here as well, because I think that's an important thing that's underlying everything that we're talking about here. Mm-hmm. Certainly agree that, particularly in the next 5-year time span, we're facing a crunch on the availability of these gas turbines. The ones that you can get on the back end are going to cost more. And if you're not doing everything possible to ensure that the resources that are ready to plug in are able to do so, then there are very real and important electricity price implications. We've started to see the beginnings of that, particularly last year, really come into focus. It became even to the extent that it was a hot button political issue, something that us energy nerds don't often see. It's certainly possible that absent changes there, that could persist into 26 and beyond. So yeah, ensuring that we're bringing on stuff that is least cost and able to meet this growing demand is really critical.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about that, since you brought up affordability, which is the buzzword of the day, essentially. So a lot of states are talking about how they're going to combat that, from using RGGI funds to freezing rates to you name it. Yeah. So what are the states doing right now that actually are going to be helping the clean economy when it comes to the power sector? Why don't we start with you, John?
Sure. Yeah. It's been an interesting time to look at state policy because, during the first Trump administration, you really did see, states coming out with really ambitious targets. We're going to be 100% clean. We're going to have 100% renewable power sector, lots of ambitious goals. And what we're seeing this time around is way more, how do states do the blocking and tackling of bringing clean stuff onto the grid? Whether that's ensuring that I think Colorado and Maine are good examples of places where there's been efforts to expedite permitting processes so that these resources that can qualify for the clean electricity tax credits are able to do so. You're seeing in Virginia right now. I don't know whether Governor Sandberg has signed it yet or not, but there's a bill that's seeking to bring a little more clarity to solar permitting in the state. So lots of things to actually empower the resources that are available and able to be brought online right now, and those are the things that are going to matter in the near term to ensuring that we're bringing on the capacity that we need.
To ensure from a cost competitiveness standpoint, or just like regardless,
just to plug in,
just to plug in.
In a lot of cases, when you look at an interconnection queue that's more than 2 terawatts in size, there's lots of stuff that's ready to come online that is just having a hard time doing so. And so any efforts to expedite the process from the beginning of a commercial development through the commercial operation only yields to the good from a price perspective.
So you mentioned Colorado and Maine and potentially Virginia. Are there other states that you think are really trying to be proactive here and clear barriers?
Maybe John's got some good examples of that. I'm sure that there's lots of creative stuff happening across the country.
John, what do you say?
Let's go to the perennial leader in clean energy, which is Texas. And sure, you've got some sort of shenanigans that go on during some of the sort of their open access model has proven quite effective, and they've been able to, essentially become the leader across all these technologies and are able to quickly bring a bunch of this power on the grid. And I agree with Ben, right? Like I think speed to market is what's critical here, and the quicker we can open up the interconnection queue process, the permitting process, the siting processes, et cetera, is going to yield ultimately lower costs for consumers at the end of the day. The other thing that a lot of states and commissioners are also thinking about is cost allocation, right? So you've got these large loads that are trying to connect to the system that in many cases have pretty big implications for the grid itself, right? Big upgrades from both a transmission standpoint and a bunch of new generation that needs to come online. And it raises just an equity question around who's going to pay for all of those upgrades. In some cases, those upgrades are probably needed and should have been made a long time ago. And this is sort of the straw that broke the camel's back to push it across the finish line. But in other cases, the large load is probably the only beneficiary of that upgrade. And so you see across the states taking different kind of perspectives on, how do we go about that cost allocation process so that those costs and benefits of those investments are kind of doled out appropriately.
I want to ask a follow-up on that one, just because it's something I've been talking about with states too. There's always a rush to attract investment, when you're talking about the potential for tens of millions, even hundreds of millions of dollars of investment for a power project. And that can sometimes lead to a race to the bottom. But at the same time, it's, similar to what you guys are talking about. There's so much demand because there's a race essentially for the future of AI and all this money coming in from the tech industry, that there's an opportunity for states to kind of have a little bit more leverage than a race to the bottom. So how do we make sure that whatever does happen, it actually does consider equity and the benefits to the everyday ratepayer, instead of just looking at trying to get the shiniest object from the tech industry? I know that's kind of simplifying the challenges and such, but it is something that I think policymakers are increasingly trying to pay attention to.
Yeah, I mean, I think getting the attribution, the cost attribution right is critical in that regard. But I also think back to this notion of states taking a somewhat different approach. We have a new report out today that we did with the new Energy Industrial Center at RMI. That looks explicitly at this question of, like, in the Southeast, if you wanted to attract electrotech investment, so that's everything from building the components that are going onto the grid all the way through installing stuff on the grid. What are some interesting policy solutions that states could take there? And it turns out that there's some pretty strong cost benefit ratios to this stuff. So you're making a little bit of investment of state budgets, particularly in this environment where some of the federal support is going away now, or on the verge of going away. That can be really beneficial in helping to attract and crowd in private investment into your state when you're one of the people who is actually trying to race to the top instead of race to the bottom on this, and build out this not just the the capacity itself, but also everything upstream of that. So some really interesting stuff to look at in that space.
Great plug for you.
We got to do it.
Yeah. John, go over to you on that one, and then we've got to wrap up. So go ahead.
Yeah, I just look, moving quickly is really important here, right? I think every moment that you make it difficult to plug in these projects to help the load get interconnected is just creating additional kind of cost and friction in the system. The real solution is bringing a lot of new power to the grid so that we can keep up with the demand growth that's going on. And we've got to leverage the technologies that are available to us. We did this study that we just released 2 weeks ago, looking at PJM specifically, and basically what would happen to that market if you weren't effectively allowed to build wind and solar and storage technologies in that space. I think a plethora of unintended consequences would come up, both not being able to satisfy demand and sort of ceding the large load growth race to either other markets, other states, or other countries. But I think more critically, it leads to an increase in costs. And even if you can plug that hole with another technology, say you can get enough natural gas turbines, you're still going to look at a pretty significant increase in cost for consumers. We think that number is roughly $360 billion over 10 years, or between $300 and $800 per year for a 10-year period for the customers in that market. So it's not chump change. It's real dollars coming out of people's pocketbooks to support a grid that is less sort of cost effective than it otherwise could be. But I think the key thing is speed to market. How do we actually get these projects through the queues? How do we take the impediments out of the way so they can actually be built and start delivering that energy that the system needs?
Yes, build. I hear it. Okay, guys, last question for you. I'm an eternal optimist. That's why I live in Washington, D.C. and trying to do work in public policy. So give me some bright spots, things to look forward to in 26 in this space.
For me, I'll be really interested to see some commercial operations of some new flavors of clean electrons coming onto the grid this year. Fervo's Cape Station in Utah has a commercial operation in 2026. Form Energy's big with iron air battery is meant to come online in Michigan as well. We know that we need to be building a ton of the stuff that we're doing right now, even more than we have in the pipeline today. And we know that we're going to need this next generation of technologies as well. And so really excited to see some of this stuff start to get a foothold in the market as well.
Right on. John.
Yeah, well, let's draw offshore wind into this conversation. Been a rough couple of years for the technology, but we're actually about to see a couple of really sizable projects come online. Vineyard's going to fully finish after lots of years of trouble. The coastal Virginia offshore wind facility is, building out rapidly and is looking to finish this year as well. Revolution Wind also on pace for being online this year. So we're going to have a ton of new offshore wind capacity that's going to come into markets that desperately need it, right? This is PJM, New York ISO, and ISO New England markets that are sort of, always on the headline page of the NERC reliability reports, right? So it'd be great to see that technology actually delivering in meaningful ways to the grid and hopefully being recognized for its contributions to those markets and serving both the capacity and energy needs that we have there. The other bright spot that I'm focused on in 26 is storage. And I think, it's a technology that has primarily been deployed in Texas and California so far. We're starting to see it proliferate outside of those two states into other markets. A lot of utilities and even a number of the large buyers are really recognizing not only the cost effectiveness of that technology, the speed to deploy, but also its just ability to meet those capacity needs and kind of firm up clean energy choices if they're choosing to make them. So excited to see that technology see another record year of deployment.
Yeah, for sure. I think we can expect a lot more storage. Offshore wind did a really good job during the winter storm in the Northeast. Really great performance there from those turbines. So it's good to hear you be optimistic about that tech. That's the end of the show. So thanks, Ben and John, for joining me for the first episode of Atlas Live. Stay tuned. We'll be back soon with